Greetings. My name's Guy Dauncey, and this is the show Change the World. Back for a new season, yay! When I like to bring guests on the show who share my passion for big, bold, exciting solutions for a positive vision of the future. We have no whiny, moany, groany, doney stuff on this show. And my guest today is Sonia Furstenau, MLA with the Green Party, the MLA for Cowichan.
Yeah.
Prior to that, you were regional director in the Cowichan Valley.
Yes,
you were a school teacher before that.
Yep.
You sit on 7 committees and stuff like that. But today, I want to talk specifically about some of your big interests. But before we get to that stuff, what's it like moving from being a regional director to being an MLA?
You know, it was actually really, really helpful to have spent time at local government, and particularly as a regional director, because as an area director, you're responsible for one area. So I was with Shawnigan, and nearly 10,000 people, and there was me representing all these people.
You'd done nothing in politics before this, like?
No, I'd paid a lot of attention.
Yes.
And
you'd done politics as a teacher in school, but that's not the same.
Well, I mean, I taught history, and I certainly spent a lot of time with my high school classes. If there was ever an election, I would bring in all the candidates.
Okay.
And so I would really encourage my students to get informed and involved. I think it's really important.
And you were quite the climate activist, following that sort of stuff.
Yep. So my husband Blaze, who you know quite well, he and I were with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is creating the political will for a livable climate. And before that, we were with Results Canada.
Yeah.
Which is to address the worst aspects of global poverty. So a lifetime of wanting to be a part of the solution.
And then suddenly last May you go from being a regional director to being an elected MLA with the Green Party.
And one of 3 Green MLAs, and in a situation where we're in the balance of power.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have scripted that, and there was no playbook to say, here's how you do this, or here's how it goes. It was certainly one of the most exciting times of my life, but also one of the most stressful and challenging.
Yeah.
But I think that the best advice I got was soon after getting elected as a regional director. And it was from George Cuff, who's a consultant on local government. He was the mayor of Spruce Grove, Alberta. And he said, you come into this job and you've got one thing of value, and that's your integrity. And if you give that up, it's gone. And I think that it's so important in a job like this to recognize I'm here in service.
Yes.
I represent everybody in my riding. I also work on behalf of everybody in BC. Yeah. And that my role is really as MLA for Cowichan. That is first and foremost.
If integrity is a coin, one side is integrity. You practice integrity. The other side is trust.
Yes.
Because people will give you trust if they see you're acting with integrity. Yeah. And that trust can flip when people start doing crazy things.
Well, and trust is such an important aspect of democracy.
Yeah.
We have to have that trust that our elected officials are working on behalf of us. And I talk about trust all the time, and I know we're going to get to watersheds, and you know my story with Shawnigan.
Yes.
Our community lost trust in government.
Well, in America, which is another story, I read that they annually poll levels of trust, and the levels of trust in Congress are down below 20%. Like 80% of people don't trust the whole organs of government. Of course, when that happens, then to find a savior who can, and everything goes crazy. Yeah. What level of trust do you feel that you have in the Cowichan Valley area who you're representing?
Well, I feel it's my job to create that trust and to feed it and to make sure that people have access to me and to my office. And so this month, for example, we've been, it's June and July, we've been out of the session. So the session ended in May. And I was just telling you before we started, like this equates to 12, 14-hour days typically in the riding.
When the legislature is sitting?
No.
Afterwards, when it's not sitting. Now. And how many thousand emails a day are pouring into your computer?
So a typical, so we probably get about 100 emails a day to the MLA email address. And then I probably get between 30 and 50 to my personal address. There's phone calls, there's people coming in. I've been doing a lot of town halls lately. I've been going out to a lot of events, giving a lot of talks at various organizations, because building those relationships and making sure that people know that it doesn't matter how they voted, I am their representative, and I am here on their behalf. And so building and strengthening that trust is a huge part of my job.
So I know that one of the issues you came in on this was watersheds because of the Shawnigan, dumping crisis, but then you looked at watersheds for the province as a whole.
Yeah.
What does it look like in terms of our ability to protect our watersheds?
Well, it's a great question. One of the things that was underpinning the decision-making process that resulted in the permit for contaminated landfill at the headwaters of our drinking watershed in Shawnigan was something called professional reliance, which was brought in under the Gordon Campbell government, early 2000s, and it was essentially a deregulation. So instead of having government oversight when projects come in, applications for big projects, resource projects, land use projects, industry hires its own professionals, and then the government relies, this is professional reliance, relies on the information brought forward by those professionals.
That professional, right.
And what happened in Shawnigan was the proponents for the landfill had hired engineers to do the technical assessment and the design, but we discovered partway through that they had a profit-sharing deal.
Yeah.
And we thought...
So that's complete conflict of interest.
Absolutely. And we thought, well, of course the government now is going to say, well, this permit can't stand. Yeah. But they said, no, under professional reliance, you can have this kind of arrangement. And so that's when I really decided that running for provincial office was informed by my desire to see that system fixed. And so the report just came out on professional reliance. So this is something we put in our agreement with the NDP. And it's got 121 recommendations. It's a 150-page report, but it acknowledges that there are significant gaps in this system, and that resulted, again, we're going to come back to this lack of trust in communities around decision making, and we see it. We see the NEB is another example of this, National Energy Board, and the pipeline approvals. People don't trust that process.
That's right.
We see it with Prosperity Mine and the application for approval of the mine up there again.
Yes.
We see it after what happened in Mount Polley. That sense that, wait a minute, government's supposed to make sure that these kinds of disasters don't happen. What was the failing there?
So I've heard the term being used that when someone hires a professional biologist, the distrust is using the term they're a biostitute. Because they're prostituting their services to please whoever their paymaster is, and therefore the trust disappears.
And that's I think that we have to recognize that the professionals in this, people who got the training and have all the credentials, this is not the problem. The problem is that everybody's put into a situation where really, if you're being paid for by industry to produce a report and they don't like that report, well, what stops them from going to somebody else who's going to produce a report that maybe they like a bit better? And then you get in situations like we had in Shawnigan, where one professional says, this is a perfect location for contaminated landfill, and another professional says, you couldn't find a worse location. And so then the government says, well, our professional reliance legislation says we trust the professional that was hired by industry.
So there's another situation which is linked to this, which is in the area of Yellow Point where I live, we're trying to protect the coastal Douglas fir forest generically. And the current legislation, which is all the watershed, so that the rain falls on the forest, that protects the water, which filters into the aquifer, right? And where you have a riparian zone, like an actual creek, the forest is protected on either side. Where it's upland forest, there's no kind of protection whatsoever. So legally, you can come in and get the chainsaw out and cut as much forest as you want, and not a single government permit comes in, even though the aquifer and the watershed gets, and our water supply gets damaged because of that. So that's going a step beyond professional reliance.
Absolutely. And so it's, again, and I hear from so many communities all over BC right now who are feeling such distress about plans for logging in their watersheds or watersheds that have been logged to the extent that now you don't see the capacity for the soil to retain the water.
Yeah,
so
and you get the runoff, all the dirty runoff, and the soil's being washed into the sea.
That's right. So you get and now with climate change, we're getting heavier and heavier rains, and so the runoff happens all at once, and you get the flooding season.
Yes.
And then the rains stop, and the temperatures go up, and the water's gone, and we get the fire season.
Yes.
And these are the two seasons we seem to be moving into.
The temperature inside a mature forest is a lot cooler than in a clear cut.
And so I'm really committed, sort of following the work on the professional reliance piece.
Yes.
That's the problem piece, right? And so this is back to you, Guy, and this is what I really like about you, is what's the solution?
Yeah.
And I think that we really do have to look at watershed-based thinking as a solution. And we have a pilot project of this happening in Nicola Valley.
Okay.
So watershed governance.
Yeah.
And it's a co-governance model between local government and First Nations. Yeah. In the Cowichan, we've had the Cowichan Watershed Board with the co-chairs of that board, Chief Seymour from Cowichan Tribes and Sean Lefebvre, the chair of the CBRD. And you know, it's a model for how do we think about watershed governance, how do we think about decision making that looks at the whole picture of the watershed. And so when we look at it, one decision, it's not in isolation from all the other decisions that have happened or might happen. And we say, okay, what services does this watershed provide?
Everyone's around the table and they fully understand the services, but the law says that a private landowner can clear cut his forest apart from riparian. No amount of sitting around the table legally can stop that.
No, and so we need to transfer that watershed governance thinking into practical regulations and practical applications. And we need to recognize that if we lose the capacity of these watersheds to retain, to filter water that we all depend on in our communities, we can't replace that. It doesn't come back.
So one of the thoughts we've been having and been coming to us, the Agricultural Land Reserve does a great job of protecting agricultural land. We're toying with the idea of a coastal Douglas fir land reserve, where a landowner wouldn't lose the development rights, but there have to be clustered housing instead of 5-acre lots scattered everywhere, and then all the forest comes down, and then the rest of the forest could be protected in the the wildwood method of forestry, which is ecoforestry, where you're allowed to log the forest, but you do it on a model that restores the forest back to its old growth quality over 200 years. So a landowner can still pull some trees out, but the forest as a whole is being restored and not destroyed. Right?
Yeah, and it's recognizing that there's no conflict. There doesn't need to be a conflict between sustainability and good economics. In fact, they go together. And if our economic model is all about reaping the most profit we can right now, and the future doesn't matter, then we are not doing a good job of either stewardship of our resources and our land, but neither are we doing a good job of stewardship of the economy for future generations.
I think there's a flip happening. Our mindset coming out of the Enlightenment, and we're here to dominate nature, we're here to get a control of science, technology. So I believe the legal definition of land ownership is your right to extract and harvest. And if that was changed to, we are stewards of that land for not just the next generation, but for the next 5,000 generations. Our mindset needs to change spiritually as well as legally.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to take some effort, but I think we're seeing the impacts now, right? And increasingly we anticipate and expect that as long as you're not in one of the two top tier watersheds in BC, which is Victoria and Vancouver, they own their watersheds. Everywhere else. And I'd say Vancouver Island is the bottom tier because it's almost all privately owned land. We anticipate that there's going to be boil water advisories, that there's going to be, limits on use of our water. There's going to be more and more danger that our aquifers are going to be depleted.
And the link to that, though, is that the landscape on Vancouver Island that we, frankly, love, right? The combination of farmland, forest, and water. The housing crunch that's coming, with people in Vancouver can sell for $2 million, buy on the island for $500,000, put $1.5 million in the bank and retire at age 50. The agricultural land's protected, but the forest is not. So I worry that in 20 years, Vancouver Island could look like Surrey, with all due respect to Surrey, just be housing. Unless So the simultaneous need to protect the watershed and the landscape views come to the same thing, which gets us onto housing.
Yes.
You must be getting a lot of constituency calls around the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, and it's really hit Duncan and Cowichan very hard.
Yeah.
We have a lot of vulnerable people, a lot of people who are in precarious housing right now, or people who simply don't have housing. When I speak with Chief Seymour, there's a wait list for Cowichan tribes members of over 450 for housing.
That's just within the Cowichan tribes.
Just within Cowichan tribes.
Yeah.
And so it is a crisis. And I think, you know, again, we can't, it's not about just applying the same ideas in the past that haven't been proven to work. And so the 5-acre pieces or the big house. We need to look at housing, one, as a right. People need to have a place to live. It is the foundation for well-being for anybody. But two, how do we, I love, you know, you put up a lot of posts about the micro communities, and the
tiny
connection,
home village idea,
the tiny home villages, and the connections that affords to people, which is a huge part of health and well-being.
Because I hear people saying, I need a home, but I also want community, and I also want a place where I can grow my own food and play with the children and have I mean, for millions of years we lived in village clusters, going right back to our time in the jungle. This living in separated houses and therefore loneliness is a totally alien experience.
And I even noticed that, you know, after we moved up to Cowichan from Victoria, and I love Victoria, and we had a great community in Fairfield, but that the little communities up in Cowichan each have a little village center of some kind. So Shawnigan has the little Shawnigan village, and there is a cohesiveness there. People get to know each other. They learn to trust each other. They develop friendships. The kids develop. There is a real bond that happens in these smaller communities that I find so wonderful and nurturing. And we have to look at land use as a way to say, how do we capitalize the best on that? How do we keep the best of these rural areas, while at the same time creating housing that meets the needs of people, is affordable, but cultivates more community.
But I think of a little village like Cobble Hill, and my mental picture of it is very scattered housing, and you could, with a European-style village, when you could have a village centre with shops and stores and 3-level buildings right at the village centre, you could probably get several thousand people in Cobble Hill without any extra land being consumed, just by increasing the density within the village.
Within the village. And there's a lot of, in the official community plans, there's a lot of that urban containment boundary thinking. And so then it becomes the importance of the political will to stick within those visions, to say, well, we're not going to make another exception and another development that's way out past the urban containment valley and more forestry gone. And then you end up with other kinds of conflicts where there's industrial activity happening and people think, well,
so I know that in the Cowichan Valley there is a vote coming up this October on a small extra increase in taxes, about $25 per home, to create an affordable housing fund linked to the Cowichan Housing Association. Right? And I hear, to me, that's an absolutely essential thing to happen, because it creates a function for the local government to do something about housing. But I hear a lot of older people of my generation saying, well, no one supported me when I was young and I can't afford to pay it on my taxes. They're just giving pushback negatively, although anyone who's older can defer their taxes. You don't need, if you're over 50, you can defer your taxes till you die in terms of the house value.
Yeah, we're in a constant tension between the sense of individual kind of rights and privileges versus how do we address the common good? Because at the same time, I'll hear from people who say, well, it really distresses me to see homeless people or to see people with addictions and mental health issues. Why aren't you doing something about that? So government really is a contract between citizens and the institution of government to say, we're gonna have this institution to provide these services, to provide these foundations, this infrastructure that actually raises everybody up to their. I see it as, at its best, government is about ensuring that everybody meets their full potential. So education is part of that. Infrastructure, clean water,
housing security,
hospital, healthcare, housing security. All these things mean that everybody meets their potential. When what we have increasingly, and this is the growing inequality that we have, where more and more wealth is concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, which means that more and more hands have less and less, that results in that loss of potential for so many people. And that harms all of us. How many scientists, how many innovators, how many entrepreneurs, how many artists are not able to meet that potential that enriches all of us?
So how important is it for people to vote for this referendum on the housing levy this October in the Cowichan Valley area, in the Cowichan Valley Regional District?
Yeah, there's actually a referendum on, there's two questions on the referendum, because it's the housing levy, which I think is, as you say, it provides the capacity for there to be a function within the regional district to be able to leverage that capacity and to get the housing going that they want to see going. So when they're working with BC Housing, they need that ability to say, well, we have a function to do this. The other one that they're asking for is the watershed, the watershed piece.
To pay for more watershed management.
And so these are both, wide-ranging goals, but the current structure of the regional district means that they don't have the functions. So people say, I want to make sure that my water is protected. I want to make sure I have clean and drinkable water. But that service has a cost, right? And I think that we're always coming up against these tensions between how do we cope with that? How do we manage that?
And there's a third vote coming up this fall as well.
There is an important vote. About
the voting system.
There is.
What's your advice to people on that one?
Well, it's no secret that I'm very much in support of proportional representation, which, as you know...
So take it back a step and just remind viewers what the vote is.
There's a referendum, it's a mail-in referendum. October 22nd, the ballot goes out. It needs to be back in by November 30th.
Okay.
And it's a referendum on our electoral system. So currently we're under a first-past-the-post system.
Yes.
We're one of only 3 major democracies left in the world that operate under first-past-the-post.
Yes.
In the OECD countries, more than 85 countries operate under proportional representation. And what we're seeing now in all 3 of these countries is how first-past-the-post isn't working anymore. It's fundamentally a medieval system. Like our electoral system and our democracy comes out of Westminster parliamentary system out of England. And we're talking back to the 13th century, or the origins of it. And when we have more than a 2-party system, what ultimately happens is it takes less than a majority for one party to get a majority of seats in the House and all of the power.
So when I look back to the provincial election a year ago, I read some people saying, oh, it's an invalid government because they don't represent blah, blah, blah. But I say, well, look, between the NDP and the Greens together, there's 58% of people represented. And if the Liberals had switched another couple of seats, they'd have won with 39%. Or something like that. So it does give very screwy results.
It's very funny, and for years in my life now, I wake up after elections in the morning, and the newspaper will say, huge mandate to Party X.
The public has voted for Rob Ford, for instance.
Stunning mandate. And you think, 39% of the popular vote is not a stunning mandate. And what both the politicians and the media should be saying is, well, only less than the majority of people voted for us. And so I will commit to working with the other parties, which actually collectively represent the majority.
To win with 39% is a stunning electoral defeat. Even if you get the most MLAs and get to govern. That's the craziness of it.
And so we have this opportunity to modernize our electoral system in BC. And so there's a 2-part ballot coming, and the first part is, do you want to stick with first-past-the-post, or do you want to switch to proportional representation? And you have the choice to just answer that. You don't even have to answer the second part.
Yes or no.
Yes or no. Yes to first-past-the-post or yes to proportional representation. The second part of the ballot has 3 proportional representation systems. You can choose one. You can rank them 1, 2, 3. Or you can say, you know what, I don't know enough, but I'm going to trust that the committee that comes together, the all-party committee that comes together after the election, will ensure that all of the factors that have been laid out are going to be taken into account.
But the municipal election is October the 20th, I think, isn't it?
22nd? No, it's the 20th, you're right.
So once we're done with that, then we can get our attention fully and then spend a month learning about it.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
And the information is out there right now. The Ty's put out a great 5-minute video explaining the 3 systems that are on the ballot. Elections BC is going to be providing educational information to every household.
Right.
There's going to be no, I said this the other day, there'll be no shortage of information.
Yeah.
There will be an abundance of misinformation.
Yes.
And that's the challenge that we have right now, which is filtering through, fear or misinformation that's going to come at us if you do this terrible thing will happen.
I've heard the claim that proportional voting will allow tiny minority parties with extreme racist views to come in and dominate. But that's to do with the threshold. If a party gets 1% of the vote, or if they get
so the threshold that's already been established is 5%, according to the
I would even argue for 10% personally. So there we go.
Well, the regulations that came out, and 5%, but that even if you get a seat or two, you have 94 other members or whatever the count, because I think the idea is there'd be about 8 more MLAs to address the regionality.
Yeah.
I saw a news piece just last week about openly white supremacist candidates running in the U.S. congressional elections for the Republican Party.
Yes, for the mainstream party.
Your electoral system is not what produces extremist views. In fact, and this comes back to what we were talking about, extremist views go hand in hand with extreme inequality. Yeah. So the more unequal a society becomes, the more people who feel like they're not able to benefit from the society, the more they want to find somebody to blame. When we look at the antecedents to the rise of extremist views in Europe in the World War II period, inequality was the underpinning. And I think we have to recognize that if we don't want extremism,
address that.
We have to address inequality.
Just a minute left, believe it or not.
Okay, no way.
Because some people are cynical that all politicians are just blah, blah, blah. Tell me what you've really enjoyed about being an MLA.
I've enjoyed connecting with so many people. I've enjoyed being in service. I've enjoyed helping people. I've enjoyed knowing that I have purpose and working on that purpose and seeing outcomes. I've enjoyed just the fact that I can help. That is the biggest thing.
So you're saying being a politician can be a form of joyful service?
It is.
Not just a cynical thing.
I'm going to use that a lot, Guy. It's joyful service. It is indeed that.
Because I fear that the cynicism, people say, you'll never find an honest politician. That is so corrosive. I know so many people who are working so hard, like you, to serve the public in a joyful, honest way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, look, thank you so much for your volunteering, for your working, for your helping, for doing all this.
Thank you.
And good luck with the whole summer, the fall, and things ahead.
Thank you.
So this has been the show Change the World. My name's Guy Dauncey. One of my contributions to this is a big book that I wrote called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, which imagines all these great ideas put together in an imaginary visit to Vancouver in the year 2032. Journey to the Future. And if you enjoy this kind of show, tune in next week for more, and we'll have more scintillating, visionary, inspiring, hopeful, positive guests. Thank you for watching.